Good evening everyone. You're very welcome to this live virtual crop walk. My name is Michael Hennessy. I'm here in Oak Park today. Normally we'd have a crop open day where we would have everybody in so we could talk on a one-to-one. But today, because of COVID-19, we're going to have a virtual crop walk. So we're going to go outside to the crops outside with Johnny Hogan, the farm manager, to give us an idea what they're like. And then we're going to go back into the studio with Steven Kildea, Shay, Phelan and Ciaran to chat about each of the various different crops, and for you then to ask your questions to those experts. So really looking forward to it. Hope you can stay with us for the entire hour. Hello and welcome to the virtual crop walk. It's our first attempt at doing this, so we hope you will be as interactive as you can. We're really hoping that you will answer questions all the way through our live crop walk, and we think we'll be live for about the next hour or so. So hopefully you can join us for that entire period. For those of you who are joining us on the phone and who can't see the video, we are recording this and it'll be up on the YouTube channel, the Teagasc Crops YouTube channel after this, so you can view it at your leisure later on. So the format for this evening is we're going to go out to Johnny Hogan, who's the farm manager here in Oak Park. He's going to give us an outline of 3 different crops: winter barley, winter wheat and spring barley. We're then going to come back to the studio and I'm joined with my colleagues here in the studio, Ciaran, Shay, Phelan and Steven Kildea, and we're going to discuss various different options for those. So without further ado, we're going to go out to Johnny out in the field so we can describe what's I suppose the story with winter barley at the moment.
It's John Hogan, Teagasc farm manager here in Oak Park. We're out in the field of Cassia winter barley, which was sown on the 16th of October. We have a very well established crop. We reckon in the region of over 900 tillers, so we're very happy with the establishment and with the crop. To date it's an index 1 soil, so we've applied 180 kilograms of nitrogen in 2 splits, 60 in the first split and in early March, and then at growth stage 31 a few weeks later we went out with our second split. So that's the nitrogen, a total of 180 kilos, which is 144 units per acre. And then we came out with our growth regulator on the 27th of April, which was C1 at a litre per hectare. Now it has got to date 1 fungicide, and that was applied on the 8th of April with Siltra at 0.6 of a litre per hectare and Bravo at a litre per hectare. And with that we incorporated in our wild oak control, which was Axial Pro at 0.65 litres per hectare. So overall, very happy with the crop. As you can see here, it's very well established, it's quite clean. So the situation is now, what the questions we ask are, the crop is almost at growth stage 49, so it's booting there up to 49. You can see a nod on appearing, but we also have some later tillers further down. So the real question is, when do we go now with our fungicide and what rate? The crop is quite clean. There's been very little disease pressure because we had a very dry April overall. So the question is, what rate and our timing for our fungicide.
Okay, that was a great outline of the growth of winter barley here in Oak Park from John Hogan, and I'm joined here in the studio by Shay Phelan. Shay, good evening. So Shay, there was 3 questions there that John kind of outlined. I suppose the first one, we might deal them in as we go along. The first one is he's talking about smaller tillers down in the crop. How should he deal with those? Are they a worry?
Yeah, so he's right, Michael, in terms of if you look at what crops we're faced out there at the moment, they are slightly more uneven this year than you would normally like. So what I have here in front of me kind of is a representation of what we're actually seeing out in the field at the moment. So if you take it where we normally like to be when we're trying to apply that final fungicide, is this tiller here, where we can have a look at this right here, where we can see the awns starting to peep out. So we like to kind of get as many of the plants as we possibly can, or many of the shoots as we possibly can, in this kind of phase here where the awns are out like that, as we call the paintbrush stage. So that's the kind of ideal scenario where we would like to be. But this year we also have a number of other tillers, side tillers like these 2 here. As you can see in this here, there's no awns starting to appear yet, even though the flag leaf is fully out. But nonetheless, they're nearly there. And these tillers here are what we're seeing a lot of in the crop as well, where the flag leaf is only emerging here, and these are the side tillers. But from the point of view of what we're trying to achieve, these tillers here, these main tillers, are the ones that are going to give us most yield. So we try to protect these first and worry about these ones afterwards. This one over here is also kind of interesting from the point of view that in the trial work that we've done before in Oak Park, traditionally what we used to do is let the head come fully out and wait for the plant to actually flower. So as you can see here, this head here is actually starting to flower. But what we know from the timing trials that we've done over the last number of years is this is actually too late. This is not the ideal scenario here. We've probably lost yield by leaving the head to come fully out here. So ideally, we want as many tillers or shoots as we possibly can in this stage here, where the awns are about an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches out.
So as guys are looking at crops at the moment, there's there's some degree of the heads nearly coming out at the moment, but it's a little bit uneven. So guys really need to have a look at the paintbrush stage, as you're saying yourself. So when we kind of move that on then in terms of the fungicides, how much yield are we going to lose between going at that right stage and maybe going a bit too late when the heads are fully out?
Yeah, so if we leave off that week or 10 days, go from this phase here to about this phase here, potentially we could lose 0.4 of a tonne per hectare. So that's pretty substantial given the price of grain this year. So really and truly the ideal time is here. So we want to try and target as many of these main tillers and side tillers at this stage here to try and maximise the yield that we're going to get. Okay,
so when we're now going to maybe move into the fungicides, so what sort of fungicides are we going to have a look at? Is there mixes that are more ideal than some straights, or what should guys be targeting?
Yeah, well, the first thing guys should really do is get out into the crops. Obviously they should know what variety is there, because quite often guys just, they're not terribly familiar with the variety. So you need to look and see what varieties are there first, and then you make your decision based on that. It's probably the first IPM technique that we have. So when you're looking at the varieties, you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of the diseases in those varieties, okay? So if you have something like Cassia, which is pretty popular out there this year, we know it's susceptible to Rhynchosporium, okay? So we have to treat that. Likewise with, say, likes of Tower, which is susceptible to net blotch, so we need to treat that. But primarily what we're trying to control at the moment is Ramularia, because all varieties are pretty much going to get Ramularia. So from that point of view, what we have to look at is controlling Ramularia first, and then the other diseases afterwards. So from the work that we've done here over the last number of years, we know that chlorothalonil works the best on Ramularia that's out there. So from that point of view, chlorothalonil should probably be the first product in the mix, whether that's in the Bravo or different formulations. Secondly, then we're looking at triazole going into the tank, and again, if we have something like Cassia, which this is here, we're trying to target those wet weather diseases, even though it's been very, very dry. There is Rhynchosporium in this crop, so we do need to target the Rhynchosporium from that point of view. So we're looking at prothioconazole, and it's probably the most widely used triazole in barley. You have it in the likes of Proline, Siltra, Latticeira, all those different types of products. So we to target those wet weather diseases as well, and we also know that we need to stack those up with, say, like strobs and triazoles to try and give more efficacy to those.
And can I just ask you, just in terms of of disease levels out there, you mentioned some Rhyncho in that crop, which is Cassia, I think you said. Yeah. Is there much disease out in the rest of the crop? Like, should people be worried?
Obviously, it's been very, very dry for the last month, so that's absolutely after helping us from the point of view of disease control. Where Ciaran is down south, they've actually had quite a bit of rain over the last couple of weeks, so the likes of the wet weather disease, the likes of Rhyncho, the likes of net blotch will start to move if you get rain. Up from Carlow north, if you like, we have had plenty of dry weather, so you're more likely to get, or potentially going to get, something like brown rust coming in. So again, we need to bear in mind where we are, the location we are, and the rainfall we've had, and try and project forward as to what we're trying to protect against. So when you're trying to make that decision, whether you're doing with your advisor, as I presume a lot of farmers will try and do it with their advisor, you need to try and project or need to take into account all those different factors in terms of rainfall, variety, and what you want to do going forward.
Okay, and is there specifics that you would recommend as regards various different varieties? Do we do something different on, say, your Cassia in comparison to maybe Tower?
Yes and no. Obviously, like, we have mixes out there, so we have mixes of active ingredients in terms of we've triazole, SDHI, and strobilurin mixes. So if you were looking at, say, some of our wet weather diseases, likes of Rhyncho or net blotch, you can mix, say, likes of prothioconazole with, say, either a strob or an SDHI, which will give pretty good control. The strobs will obviously have better activity on, say, like some net blotch by and large. So you try and put maybe a strobilurin in there to try and control that net blotch. SDHIs will give pretty good control as well, so if you want to make it simple, you can kind of try and reduce the number of products that you're having to buy. You will get good control, provided you don't get on a very dirty variety like tower.
So we're pretty good at mentioning strobs and triazoles and that kind of stuff, just so people understand in terms of maybe some of the trade names, so people can recognise the mixes and matches of types of products they might use.
So probably the most common ones are the likes of Siltra, which is a mix of prothioconazole and an SDHI. We have the likes of Latacera, which is the same as prothioconazole, another SDHI. Ciaran is another one, which is a different triazole, which is Opus and an SDHI. And you can mix those with the likes of Comet, which is a strobilurin. Those type of products are pretty commonly used in barley.
Okay, so we have some of those various different products. So what sort of rate? I mean, will guys be pushed into using kind of bigger rates, or really the weather's, the crops are clean, weather is dry? I mean, how much do we really need this year? Yeah,
again, it's a very good question, and we have done trial work here looking at rates of chemical or fungicides on spring and winter barley. And unlike wheat, what we found is that half rates of your products, or your, whether it be a prothioconazole or a proline or Latacera or Siltra, whatever it is, give pretty good control. They give almost as good a control as full rates. So we have capacity in our programs to cut rates on winter barley. 50% rates are generally what we recommend are quite good. With one exception in terms of ramularia. We do know we need to go with a litre of chlorothalonil to try and give us the best control we possibly can on ramularia.
So I have a question in here, and the question is around brackling. How much fungicides do I need to control brackling, or does fungicides help in the control of brackling?
They do, quite simply. Again, ramularia is one of the main diseases that we reckon is responsible for brackling in crops. So Bravo, from that point of view, or chlorothalonil, will give us quite good control on that. Some other products will also help against stem disease as well, and keep those stems cleaner for longer. So that the longer we can keep those stems clean, the less likely we are to get the brackling. So keep your rates. Half rates are still fine. We shouldn't be trying to put more than that out.
Okay, another question coming in here, and anybody can send in a question whenever they like. Another question here, which is talking about awns. The awns are just about peeping and PGRs. Can I put in the PGR with the fungicide at the last timing?
Ideally, I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't. But if you're in that situation, there are people out there. You're really limited to one product that you can kind of get away with, if you like, at that stage, and that's probably Ciaran. So the other thing we just need to be careful of out there when we are putting in growth regulators at this stage, crops certainly from here north are under stress. PGRs will stress the crops even more, so we want to try and avoid that stress. That stress will manifest itself in ramularia more than likely later on. So we could be trying to solve one problem, but we could be causing another problem. So we just need to be careful with that.
Okay. Shay, look, that's a really good run up. We have a few more questions after coming in here, just talking about maybe some of the hybrids and different varieties, but we might come to that towards the end. So what I'd like to just again point out to everyone, that you can ask a question. We'll try and get to your question when we can, but what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next crop. So again, we're going to go out to Johnny Hogan out in the field, who's going to be looking at some winter wheat.
Here we have a crop of winter wheat. The variety is Loomis. It was drilled on the 29th of October. We drilled in at 147 kilos per hectare, which is 380 seeds per square metre, and we got an establishment of 67%, which is 256 plants. As you can appreciate, with the back end was in it, conditions were quite rough, so on the grand scheme of things we're happy enough with the plant establishment. And now we examine the crop at the moment, we reckon we'll have in the region of over 600 tillers, which we'll be quite happy with for establishment. Because it's an index 2 soil following beans, we have a maximum of 180 kilograms of nitrogen we can apply. So we have already done 2 splits, and now we're down to a final split of 40 kilos per hectare to apply of a total of 180. So the question is, when do I go with that nitrogen now? We have in the 3rd week of April, we applied our growth regulator and our wild oak control all in the one tank. And now, with the emergence of leaf 3 last week, we went with our first fungicide. So we went with Adexer at 1.8 litres per hectare and a litre of Bravo per hectare. So the question is now, the emergence of flag leaf, how soon do we think we'll have that, and what will be the product of choice in the year that's in it? And as we know, with a very dry April, there's not a huge amount of disease pressure at the moment. So that is the question: what is going to be our major fungicide for flag leaf?
Okay, that's a great roundup again from John, and I think you can all see how dry the ground is here in Oak Park. It's pretty dry up here at the moment, but I'm joined now by Steven Kildea. So Steven, John asked a number of different questions there, the same as he did in the winter barley. The first one is nitrogen. When should guys go with their final split of nitrogen?
Okay, I suppose to start with a simple one there for Johnny, pretty much now, get it out is the simple answer to that, and hope that we get a little bit of rain or a bit of dew or something to wash it in to be taken up.
Okay, right, fair enough. That answered that one. Okay, fair enough. Right, okay, so we'll get on to your more comfortable topic maybe, which is fungicides. The second one Johnny asked was all about fungicides. I suppose the first one is timing. When should we go with the main fungicide?
Yeah. I suppose we have to, like Shay said, we have to think about the crop itself, what it's doing. And what we're trying to do is capture as much sunlight in the wheat crop to basically convert it into sugars and fill those grains that are going to come into the future in a coming month or so. So what we're trying to do now in this, I suppose the second application, mainly the second application of a fungicide, is to protect that upper canopy. And when I'm talking about the upper canopy, I'm talking about that flag leaf and the second leaf. So I'm assuming that a lot of crops now at this stage will have received the fungicide already. In that sort of scenario, it would have been to the leaf 3, would have been fully emerged, and we probably would have hit a bit of that leaf 2 that would have been coming out. So really now we're talking about timing, we're looking for the flag leaf fully emerged.
Okay, so so do you think that the timing, the crops were actually reasonably clean, I suppose, coming into the T1? Guys probably got the timing right reasonably well with that. Does that bode well for trying to get the timing right for the main fungicide?
Absolutely. Look, I think it's very important that first fungicide that would be at that leaf 3, because it covers the second leaf, and that's important. It gives a bit of coverage on that so that we can come back in when the flag leaf is fully out and hope that we haven't had huge amounts of infection in between that period between those two. And I just have an example of the crop that Johnny was looking at, the Loomis. We just took some of it in here to give us ourselves an idea. Did he cut the right leaf, or did he sort of apply to the right leaf? And what we can see is that we've dissected the plant. We now have, I suppose, the flag leaf starting to peep. We have the second leaf, and we have our third leaf. Now, I know people won't be able to see it on the screen, but I can actually see some still of the fungicide on that third leaf, and I can see some of it on the tip of the second leaf also. So the timing was right here in terms of the leaf 3 application. So the next, as I say, is going to be that flag leaf fully out.
So with that fungicide, what fungicide should we be using?
Okay. It comes back to pretty much the aspect of IPM, integrated pest management, knowing your variety, knowing the risks, and actually managing the crop in accordance to that risk. So we're looking at Loomis here, for example. We know already that we can see some septoria at the base of the crop, as you would have seen with Johnny out in the field. It's been quite dry weather, but it's still, the risk is still there. We know this variety is susceptible to septoria. The pathogen is still there in the environment. There's enough inoculum there. Over the last 3 weeks, I suppose we have been very fortunate in terms of the weather hasn't been really conducive to it. We had a period last week where we know we've had infection events. And really going forward, we then have to look at in terms of what sort of infection events occur before this full flag leaf is out. Again, we could move across to a different variety, a variety like Bennington, for example. We know that it's very susceptible to yellow rust. It might have a different sort of strategy, and I'm hoping that probably a different strategy has already been taken at the very start there in terms of trying to protect against yellow rust, for example. They're probably the main two diseases that we're looking at in terms of foliar disease control.
So just a question here from Martin, and he mentions kickback. You mentioned, in terms of what disease has been there before you get the next fungicide on. So what sort of kickback is there in fungicides now?
Okay, so if we take the main fungicides that are going to be used on wheat, we're talking about the azoles. I suppose we've had an introduction of a new azole this year in the form of Revysol and Revistar, and it does provide us quite good kickback, where we previously were with the older azoles that we'd be looking at. The older azoles, unfortunately, they are suffering from, I suppose, a curativity protection and also some level of protection. And similarly with the SDHIs, we do know that resistance has developed in the Irish population, Septoria population, that does reduce our ability to get that kickback, definitely. So again, it's going to be understanding the risk of the crop, understanding that, look, how much of this kickback do you require at that flag leaf stage, and matching basically the chemistry to that. I should also add, look, the 20th of May is going to be the cut-off point for chlorothalonil. Up until that point, look, yeah, it's going to be, it's a must in the tank up until that point, definitely. From a protection point of view, it is a very good protective chemistry. We're still, in most crops, probably in protective, especially, I suppose, from Carlow upwards. I know a bit more rain down south. But after that, like, we still need it from a resistance management, or we need another multi-site from a resistance management perspective.
And what is that multi-site you're talking about?
So we're talking about Fulpit, being honest. We do see the benefit. We do believe there's a benefit from a resistance management sort of aspect in including a multi-site there. Just because we have a new azole that is going to provide it, or is providing us good control, doesn't mean that we abandon all resistance management. I think it's important that we include it.
So we know that we can't use chlorothalonil or Bravo after May the 20th, which is probably around the time, maybe, is it, of doing the T2s on winter wheat?
Yeah, but I think if we look at this crop, you would probably say that we'll be probably applying our flag leaf spray before that. But there will be crops that potentially will be after that date.
Okay, so growers should really be aware of that, making sure they don't apply it pretty much after that date. So going back to John outside, he mentioned that it was Lumos he was standing in. You've mentioned a number of SDHIs and triazoles and that kind of stuff. What sort of actual fungicides would you recommend to him in that kind of scenario?
Okay, so in this scenario here, it's got a bit of Septoria there. Depending on where the weather is over the next, I suppose, 2 to 3 weeks, it may require a bit more protection in terms of what's coming out in terms of this flag leaf. We know that the risk is probably there, so you're going to be looking at, from this type of variety that is quite susceptible, you might be looking at something like Revistar, which is that new azole Revisol with fluoxyperoxide that's an Imtrex, and of course including that multi-site. Then there are other varieties, and we do have them here in the field, such as Bennington, that will have that yellow rust. Whether a yellow rust is going to be present at that stage, you may have to tailor your program to address that. But I suppose we're looking at our primary disease that is going to be Septoria. I suppose the other products that will be there, your SDHI azole mixes such as your Astra, your Librex, your Adexa, your Latticera, they, as I say, have suffered somewhat in the last number of years from terms of resistance development. Including a multi-site with them, it does definitely bring it back up. But again, we're getting back to making sure that timing is bang on to get the benefit out of that multi-site in the mix.
I just see a question here from Dermot, and he's asking the question. He's an earlier sown crop, so I presume must be sown in earlier October. And he's talking about, can he delay the T2 because the weather is so dry and there's so little disease?
So really what we're trying to do is protect that leaf. So it's critical to protect it, and how you protect it is when it's fully out, you get the application on it. That is really what's critical there. So we're trying to match the timing is really what's key. It's nothing changes in terms of what those timings are. So flag leaf fully out is still important.
So I suppose people would have the question, crops are pretty clean. Do I go at a lower rate? Am I going to get value for money putting the fungicide on this year?
I think undoubtedly there will still be value for money. So some crops undoubtedly are very clean. In those, I suppose, extremely late sown crops, I'm talking about stuff that's probably after Christmas, yeah, they may not have a huge amount of disease, and in some of those scenarios, yeah, the rates probably could be cut back to some extent. But I am still including a multi-site in those sort of scenarios. In the I suppose the autumn sown crops, and I'm including crops probably up until the end of November, there is differences there. So it gets back to understanding what timing was, what leaf was out, I suppose, and making sure that timing was right previously. Because we do know there's crops pretty much that may have been a month apart in terms of their sowing date, are pretty much now at the exact same sort of growth stage. And just to be aware of that, and really the only way to do it is to get into the crop and to unfold the leaves, know exactly what leaf you actually hit with that first fungicide application, and then going forward knowing that flag leaf is out.
You mentioned, Stephen, yellow rust, and there's Bennington and a few other varieties that are a bit more prone to yellow rust than other varieties. Where a guy specifically targeted yellow rust, maybe earlier in the season, should he be changing or doing something different on the T2 to specifically make sure that that particular disease is controlled?
Yeah, I know the example here is ourselves. We have a bit of Bennington in the trials. It has yellow rust, but it also has septoria. And sort of trying to combine a program to cover both of these can be, to some extent, a little bit difficult. What I would be hoping is that, look, if you knew there was yellow rust in that crop, in that first application, that there was good control of that yellow rust. Now, knowing is it still active or not is what's going to be key going forward. Because undoubtedly, look, if there's septoria there and the weather turns for septoria, it will also take off. The yellow rust may well take off if it hasn't been controlled. So it's a matter of getting into the crop, knowing where that yellow rust was, seeing is it still active. If it's still active and you do know that you're going to need some yellow rust control, then targeting it with a yellow rust product and making sure timing is right for the septoria control also.
How do you know it's active?
How do you know that? Yeah, look, it's a very difficult question. What I would say is, look, it's yellow rust. If it is a dull, very dull yellow, it may not be active. It may well have been stopped, it may well have been controlled. Is there pustules that are really that yellow appearance? And of course, knowing exactly how it's moving. So you're getting into the crop, you see it today, you see it then tomorrow, you see it the next day. Has it actually progressed? That's the clearest way to see it. But I would add that there could be cases where you're just looking at chlorosis.
So you're kind of saying it's almost like a livestock to a degree. You need to be looking at a yellow rust potential every day to see whether there's any development from one day to the next.
So ideally what we don't want to do is have to go back into cover yellow rust specifically. What we're trying to do is to maximise disease control with a 2-spray program. So what you're trying to do is, okay, know is it active? Know when you're going to, or estimate or have an idea of when you would be anticipating you're going out with your flag leaf spray, and adjusting the flag leaf spray if it is going to be active at that stage. Now, if it's extremely active, if yellow rust was not controlled at all, then it may be a case that, look, the weather conditions, if they're turning favourable for it, it may be a case of actually looking and targeting that. Because the flag leaf is coming out, if that flag leaf is damaged from this point on, it won't be returned. You won't get that green back on it.
Stephen, can I ask you a final question? You mentioned chlorothalonil. We've discussed a little bit about the 20th of May, about whether you can use it or you can't use it. If guys are past the 20th of May, they're into using fulpit instead of chlorothalonil, do they then switch to maybe some of the newer products? Will that help, or is that necessary given the year that's in it?
So it's going to come back to knowing the risk, to be honest. In terms of chlorothalonil and fulpit in a good program, I anticipate that won't be a huge difference between them. Being honest, it's going to know the risk. Okay, is there a high risk of that you're going to need the curativity that Martin suggested or asked about? In that sort of scenario, then I might be changing to the Revasol-based product at that stage, because that's where its strength will be over the others. If that curativity is not necessarily going to be required, then you can look at the older chemistries with the fulpit. But again, it's going to come back to making sure that you're bang on that time. And this comes back then to knowing the weather and knowing the risks just before it.
Okay, Stephen, look, that's great. Thanks very much for that. We're going to come back. There's a few more questions here after coming in, but we'll come back to that and the questions at the very end. What I want to do now is I want to turn and I want to look at some spring barley. So we're going to go back out to John Hogan out in the fields, who has been out looking at the crops here in Oak Park.
Here we have a crop of spring barley. The variety is Gangway. It was sown on the 24th of March in ideal conditions. As we know, we had a good dry March and excellent conditions for sowing. We drilled in at 176 kilos per hectare, which was 360 seeds per square metre down the spout. And we got a great establishment of 95%, which is 342 plants per metre square. So we're very happy with the establishment. And then we applied our normal P&K maintenance dressings, and it's an index 1 soil for nitrogen, so it's a maximum of 135 kilos of N, which is 108 units, and we have that already applied. On the 23rd of April we went with our weed control, which was Galaxy at 1 litre per hectare and Cameo Max at 45 grams per hectare. We did not include an aphicide as we felt it was not necessary. It's the nearly March sown crop. As you can see, we've got excellent weed control. You can see very well hit, so we're very happy with that. Now we have quite a clean crop at the moment. It's tailoring nicely, no disease pressure there at the moment. But the question now is, when do we go with our fungicide, and can we incorporate in our wild oak control spray with that?
Okay, thanks very much, John. That's a great overview again of the crops. I'm joined here now by Ciaran Collins. Ciaran, I just wanted to kind of go through some of the questions again that Johnny's after asking. They're all kind of very pertinent for crops that are out there at the moment. The first one is just in terms of the timing for the first fungicide.
Yeah, I suppose it's a very important question, and I suppose to answer it, I'm just going to go back a little bit and look at the fundamentals of yield and where is that yield going to come from in barley. Stephen spoke about wheat there a while ago, and we know with lower ear numbers we can compensate with grain weight. That's not something that we can do with barley. So how we maximise yield in barley is trying to maximise the number of grains per square metre, and we influence that by obviously having as many ears per square metre as we can. So the object or the aim of the first fungicide really is to protect those lower tillers, and it's those lower tillers, if we can protect those from disease, that will actually give us, help those tillers to survive, which will help us to maximise the number of ears. So I suppose then to directly answer the question in terms of timing, you know, there was experiments carried out here a number of years ago. Shay referred to it there earlier on in relation to timings. And I suppose when you look at the first timing at this stage here that I have here, main stem with 2 good tillers on it, so mid to late tillering, versus an application at stem extension, they found that there was up to 0.3 of a tonne per hectare of a difference. And when you add that to the potential that you can get from that final fungicide as well, there could be half a tonne per hectare of an advantage in bringing that program forward by 2 weeks. So you're talking about mid to late tillering and a final one as Shay described earlier on emergence, versus, we'll say, waiting for stem extension and that ear to be fully out.
So to a degree, the early bird is going to get the worm. You need to be out early to get the
yeah,
out of your
absolutely. And it's all about protecting those lower tillers, you know, from foliar disease.
Okay, I suppose it's a similar question to maybe I've asked the other lads here this evening. What sort of products should we be using? Again, it's a year that's dry. Price of barley, do we need to spend as much?
Absolutely, and I suppose talk about the timing. If in a disease, in a year where there's high disease pressure, if you can save, you know, 0.5 of a tonne per hectare, getting those timings right, you know, that would almost pay for the fungicide program. So in terms of products, I suppose the first thing we need to look at is the level of disease in the crop. So it's simply getting into the crop, having a look around, see what level of disease is there, and then obviously what diseases are there. And also to refer to the recommended list. We're very fortunate here. We've a very strong program run by the Department of Agriculture, very solid figures in terms of susceptibility to disease. So, you know, you accumulate that data and then you put your program together from there. But essentially what we're looking at is using a mix of actives, you know, that target, you know, the key disease. So if we're talking about a crop like John had there, Gangway or maybe Planet, probably 2 of the biggest varieties in the country this year, both would have a 5 of a rating on the Department of Agriculture recommended list. So, you know, that's Rinco is something that you'd certainly be watching out for in those scenarios. So in terms of a fungicide program, we know the prothioconazole would be quite strong on Rinco as an azole. Also gives you a little bit of protection there in terms of mildew if it's required, even though both those varieties would be an 8. But you wouldn't rely on one active alone. So you're partnering that up again with either a straub or an SDHI there. Again, an active that has activity on the key diseases, which probably will be Rinco in this case. And again, it's, you know, as Shay said earlier on in relation to the winter barley, it's no more than a 50% rate of the individual actives in the mix.
So a guy might argue that, look, it's a relatively dry year. Yes, you're talking about Rinco, which is a wet weather disease. But I mean, should I really be targeting that much? Do we even need 50%? Can I get that bit lower?
Yeah, I mean, so up to 50% or even more of the response can actually come from that first time. And so again, like it is about getting into the crop. If it's dry and if it's cleaner, there may be some scope maybe to look at cheaper alternatives. But I think the key fundamental still has to be that you use a mix of actives really. And if there, you know, maybe search around for a bit of value in a drier year.
And what sort of actives or products are you kind of talking about?
Yeah, so prothioconazole based, you're talking about the likes of Proline obviously, and then combination with an SDHI and likes of Siltra or Latticera would be very popular. There's pre-formulated ones, you know, Decoy Comet there as well would be probably a quite popular one as well.
And from your knowledge of trials in a relatively dry year like this, is there much of a difference between them? Does a guy really need to get, you know, very concerned that I'm using this one and not using that one?
Yeah, not particularly. And I suppose if we go back to 2018, which obviously was an extreme, obviously the return from fungicides in 2018 was little or none. So again, I suppose you're trying to balance as a part of an IPM strategy. You're trying to balance all the components, and you are taking advantage of that dry year if it's there.
So would it be right in saying that timing is probably maybe as important, if not more important, maybe than the fungicide?
Absolutely. Then timing is the key. Timing is the key.
Okay.
It says a half ton potentially in a disease year between the two timings.
The last question John had there, he mentioned that he did weed control, I think it was on the 23rd of April, he might have mentioned, and he has wild oats to control now. And he's kind of wondering, when should he put that in? Should he put that in with a fungicide, or what's the best advice for that?
I suppose again, it's getting back out into the crop, and I suppose number one, establish, do I need to spray for wild oats? That's the first thing. Having a look in the crop, obviously field history is a big one there. And I suppose, we do have a level of resistance at this stage, so we certainly don't want to apply a herbicide where we don't need to. So I suppose that's the first point, making that decision, do I need to do it? I suppose in the likes of spring barley, obviously we're quite limited in terms of actives, but if you take the likes of Phelan there, which would be in the likes of Axial Pro or Avena Nova, you need that 21 days between the herbicide and the wild oat application. And I suppose what also is very important in terms of wild oat control as well is coverage. Certainly if it goes a bit later, you're going to find that you're going to get more competition from the crop, and you may hit the main stem, and then you're in the crop next June and you're looking at these stray wild oats around the place and you're wondering what went wrong here. And if you have poor coverage, sometimes those smaller tillers escape and they come through the crop after. So I think coverage is a huge issue as well in terms of getting good wild oat control.
Okay, we have a question here from Ciaran from the Northeast, who's rightly, I suppose, reflecting what's out there in terms of crops are under stress. And he's asking the question, should we be putting in foliar feeds or something similar in with those herbicides to try and help on the crop? Yeah,
it's a great question, because there's a bit of a divide. I mean, I came from an area this morning that maybe has had an inch of rain the last 2 days, and I came up here to Oak Park and the ground is dry as a bone, and I know that from talking to advisors, especially in the Northeast there where Ciaran is, establishment was even patchy, just that soils were dry. And I suppose, in terms of foliar feeds and trace elements and all that, I suppose you'd always go back, number one, to field history and the soil test result. That's probably like it's like shining the light in terms of showing up what that soil requires. And I suppose that would always be the first port to call. Obviously, when you get dry conditions, quite often we get these transient deficiencies that, if we did get rain, that actually alleviates a lot of that problem. So I suppose to answer your question, it's looking at the soil test results. Is it a magnesium deficiency? Is it magnesium? And sort of applying on that basis. Okay.
Again, another question from Gareth, and he is talking about minimum plant counts, and he's talking about Ciagasc. Is it worthwhile putting Ciagasc on spring barley?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, it goes back to plant counts. I suppose we're all trying to establish, maybe 300, in excess of 300 plants to give us that optimum yield. Where plant count is suboptimal, below 300 or maybe even below 250 in a lot of cases. I suppose the first key thing, really, before we talk about Ciagasc is make sure all that nitrogen is out there. And again, correct any deficiencies that are there, like we just spoke about. In terms of Ciagasc, I suppose it may be worth trying, and just beware of label restrictions with some of the products. But I suppose the response to trials here wouldn't be brilliant, but it may help in some sense, but don't expect a huge response.
Okay. There's a question in here from John, who's going back to the question that we kind of talked about in the other two conversations about chlorothalonil. Chlorothalonil in spring barley, should we, it's going to be gone on the 20th of May. Should we be included, or should farmers be included in at the T1, because it probably won't be available for the T2?
Yeah, certainly won't be available for T2, and Ramallaria obviously is a big issue in spring barley, just as it is with winter barley. In terms of including it at T1, I suppose the way I put it is, if you have it in your store and you need to use it up, and before the 20th of May, certainly put it in. Unfortunately, it may give some response, but it's not going to be anything near what you'd have got at that final timing. So yes, put it in if you have it, and in a high disease pressure year, it may give you something, but again, don't expect a huge amount. I suppose the follow-on from that obviously is maybe what do I do in that scenario post the 20th of May? As Stephen spoke about in wheat, it has to be falpit at that stage. We had a very good ramularia trial on winter barley here last year, while acknowledging that falpit is obviously a long ways behind chlortalin in terms of control of ramularia. Falpit with maybe prothio at that final timing certainly will give some will be of some use against ramularia.
Okay, a useful addition. Just one other question here, and again, it's around growth regulators again, talking about Modus or Medix Max, I should say, at the first fungicide timing, which again, we're talking about mid to late tillering. Again, is that worthwhile, or is it pretty much the same as Glycosol?
Yeah, I suppose you'd be very slow in putting a growth regulator on a crop that's under stress. I think that is the first thing really. It just doesn't make sense to try and regulate growth in a crop that's already under stress. So from that perspective, if the crop is under stress, it's an absolute no-no. I suppose if you have a healthy, actively growing crop, I know some people are worried about lodging in recent years with some of the varieties we have, and I know some people have done it. It's a very tricky thing to get right. It's probably too late now, but reducing the level of overall nitrogen is probably the key way to reduce lodging pressure. But certainly not on stress crops. If a crop is subject to lodging or there's very high nitrogen on it, I think it may be worth doing if the risk is high. Okay.
We have a question that probably pertains to a lot of people, but a question from Peter in Donegal. And Peter is saying his crops are about the 4 leaf stage, so they're maybe a little bit behind, maybe down further south. The ground is very dry, and he's going to put on Zyfar and Harmony Max. Is that pretty stressful on a crop, or how should he approach that?
Yeah, again, I suppose, what we're looking for in weed control is the same as I spoke about in the fungicides, is a combination of actives, So you want to spray small, actively growing weeds. So I'd imagine at the 4 leaf stage, you should have good coverage at this stage. I think what you're looking at there, and with an eye on resistance, you need to use a rate that's high enough to control the weeds, and to spray those small, actively growing weeds. But at the 4 leaf stage, if you're spraying weeds at cotyledons and that, you may not necessarily need the full rate. So probably in that scenario, maybe reduce rates if it's at the 4 leaf stage and the weeds are actively growing.
Okay, I just have another question here to do with wild oats and resistance. The question is around not seeing great control of wild oats. What's your view on resistance?
Yeah, well, Ronan Byrne delivered a great paper to Tillage Conference this year on his PhD, and I suppose a very brief summary of it was where Ronan did targeted sampling in County Wexford. 50% of the wild oats that he found were resistant to either just use trade names, Axial Pro, or the Foxtrot. So now I suppose they were wild oats that, that was in June or July, so they either hadn't been sprayed or they were resistant, So, but, we know that we do have resistance at this stage. And I suppose just to refer back to the IPM message, it's the rotation of actives. It's limited in spring barley, so it's rotation of the crop really is how you get over that. And I suppose, again, once you've applied the wild oat herbicide, it's getting back out into the crop, and just to seize the recovery there and just noting it and, for future reference.
Okay, and what do you think about roving? People don't like doing it anymore, but is that kind of necessary?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it's something I should have mentioned. It's the very important IPM, measure. Because, if a wild oat's not controlled by the herbicide, obviously it's going to shed seed and increase that weed seed bank, and the problem gets worse and worse, So roguing, absolutely don't leave any wild oats after you pre-harvest. And again, the machinery hygiene at harvest is hugely important, getting in, blowing down that combine, the baler, etc. And it applies to all weeds, but, to stop it dragging around your own farm.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a final question before we go into a kind of a panel discussion. That's a question from Connor, who is living near the East Coast, and he's asking, is an aphicide necessary?
If a crop, I suppose, the way you'd summarise it really is the later the emergence is, the higher the risk. Okay, so, and obviously some locations then, particularly maybe further south and coastal, the pressure is higher. So, you know, where the crop is emerging maybe into late April, you know, you'd have to say the risk is much higher. But again, same as the disease, the same as the weeds, you have to get out into the crop. Do you find aphids in the crop? I think that's the key one really. You know, we know that BYGV is a big yield robber, but it's not, I suppose, doing it automatically. It's that IPM again getting out. Are there aphids there? But certainly the risk will be much higher if a crop is emerging in say late April.
Okay. Thanks, Ciaran. Look, we are going really well, and the time is flying on us. We've done the 3 major crops that we wanted to do. There's lots of questions coming in, but we only have 15 minutes left. So for anybody out there who wants to ask a question, please do so. Just click on the Q&A at the bottom and type in your answer, and we'll try our best to answer them as we go. So I might just flick back and maybe ask a couple of questions to the panel. And maybe, Shay, going across to you for a second. We have a question in here from Porrig. And Porrig asked the question about biostimulants. Should we be applying biostimulants?
Very good question, Michael, a very pertinent question. The first thing I suppose we should probably ask is, what are they going to do for us? We haven't done work on them here, in all honesty, in Oak Park. So from the point of view of why, we have to ask the question, why are we putting them on? The second question we have to ask is, what are they going to do for us? I mean, there's a myriad of different products out there. And to be blunt about it, research on it is quite sketchy from what I can see, and we need to make sure that products that are going to do something for us, and in a lot of cases the evidence that they are actually giving us extra yield is limited. So we need to be very, very careful about why we're putting these on. The other thing that we need to be careful of with not biostimulants but any product is where we are putting in a range of different active ingredients. We need to be careful that, you know, we might be hotting up or heating up the tank too much. Adding these in might just exaggerate that problem. So, I mean, as I said, the work that we've done here is very, very sketchy on it, or is very limited on it. So we just need to see what they're actually giving us in the wind.
Okay. Stephen, we have another question coming in here from Martin. And Martin asked the question that crops are a bit shorter than normal this year, maybe because they're later sown. Is there an extra potential or risk, if you like, that a disease can travel up faster up through the canopy?
I suppose Martin's talking about wheat, and I suppose the main disease being septoria is splash-borne. So you would think that, okay, the closer to the older leaves, pretty much the easier it is going to be for that septoria to get up. Yeah, that would be the case. However, how tall of a crop we need to basically avoid that rain splash and prevent that rain splash is one of the questions. And I suspect that even though it's short, some of the taller crops are probably short enough also. So I think the potential is in all crops for disease to be moving up. I don't think it's at a higher risk. I'd say pretty much it still comes back to, in terms of fungicide timings, make sure they're targeting the right leaves. That's pretty much a simple answer to that.
Okay, thank you. The one from Barty here is maybe to you, Ciaran. It says that he sprayed his wild oats about 10 days ago. Can he go back in and spray the other weeds now?
You can, yeah. Well, it depends on product, but yes, we'd say just use pinoxidin as probably the Axial Pro as the main one. You know, if you go with it first, you can follow up 10 days or a week later. Yeah, certainly with the other weed control. Yeah.
Okay, Stephen, you're in the centre, so you're going to get more questions over and back. But a question here from Mervyn, and Mervyn asked the question. It's about Elatus era, and he asked the question: there's a small amount of mildew in the crop. Will Elatus era be able to handle that?
So he'd be looking at, presumably from the Elatus era perspective, is looking at the proline component. And from a winter barley, I'm assuming it's a winter barley aspect or spring barley, proline is actually quite a good fungicide. And so I think even when we're talking about the half rates that Shay would have spoke about,
I think probably even at that, the amount of proline that probably is there is sufficient. If there was a higher level of proline or a higher level of mildew, then yes, it may be a case of looking at a specific mildew site to go in there or topping up that proline. But a small bit I would be confident of.
I think that was an oats, was the question.
It's still the same answer, being honest.
It's the same answer. Okay. Shay, just across to you, and it's a question about foliar feeds again. It's about magnesium or maybe foliar K. Is it worthwhile putting that onto crops at the later stage?
So if you're looking at, again, foliar K, we have done a little bit of work in terms of the response to K in terms of brackling control and straw strength in winter barley. But I suppose, again, it goes back to Ciaran's point earlier on about looking at the soil test. Are the soils deficient? Is the crop deficient in K? If the crop is not deficient in K and you have enough K going out, the likelihood is you're probably not going to get a huge amount of benefit from foliar Ks, especially late on in the crop. Ideally, you want those going on kind of mid-season, really kind of a stem extension rather than towards the end of the crop, because you're likely to get more response then. In those trials we did in Wicklow a couple of years ago with Martin Burke, specifically, we were looking at pretty high levels of K to try and prevent that brackling in winter barley. So you were looking at in excess of 100 kilos of K to try and prevent that brackling. And even in that sort of scenario, it delayed brackling. It didn't prevent it entirely, but it still gave us enough time, if you like, if guys were under pressure to get crops cut. But from the point of view of foliar Ks, I mean, if I would look after the fundamentals first and make sure there's enough K out there to start with. The foliar Ks are kind of only top up really after that.
Okay, so what your cost, I suppose, really would be the answer a little bit to that. Stephen or Ciaran, I just want to ask you a question about spring wheat. There's a lot of it sown this year, and there's, I suppose, different varieties out there this year. People might have been growing a lot of spring wheat over the last number of years. Can you give people an idea about the PGR and maybe disease control program that people should be looking at for those?
Yeah, like you're right. I mean, we were in around 4,000 hectares of spring wheat up to this year, which was negligible really in the overall scheme of things. Obviously, the wet autumn, has precipitated that the seed trade couldn't have anticipated the demand that there would be for spring wheat seed. So we're dealing with a few varieties maybe from the past, and also a few varieties that maybe we would be less familiar with. So there's 3 on the recommended list. There's Ciaran, Talistar and Starlight. So we've got reasonably good data there in terms of disease and not so much on lodging, because we haven't had great lodging years. Then there's other older ones, maybe the likes of Quintus. There's a bit of that around, there's a small bit of double shot around as well, and there's a variety called Mistral. I came across it there yesterday as well. So I suppose in terms of growth regulation, you certainly would be looking at, and I suppose again it's looking at the overall level of nitrogen, and the preceding crops are all feeding into it. But a good growth regulator at sort of growth stage 31 is what you're talking about, whether that's straight cycocell or maybe Triaxipec plus cycocell, which gives good base stem strengthening in that. And I suppose then there is the option of following up maybe in around flag leaf time if the crop is tall or has that lush colour to it and it's thick maybe, and you are worried about lodging. The only caveat there obviously is you need to, especially with like some mushroom trade, you need to watch the turple there. But that's probably a 2-step process. One at that sort of 30-31 timing, and then maybe a follow-up in around flag leaf.
And disease control care?
Disease control, is very, very important to know your variety, hugely important. Quintus is one that jumps into my mind straight away, 2017. Anybody that grew Quintus in 2017 will never forget it from mildew. From the start of the season all the way till almost to its semester, it had mildew. I think it had a score of 3 at the time when it went off the list. So if you're growing with a Quintus, you need to get a very early mildew-side program in there. The other one, just to mention one other one, that Mistral just came across it there yesterday, was in the department recommended list trials for a while, and he's quite susceptible to yellow rust. So again, just getting in early at that first time and again.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to do a bit of a quick fire round here. We've only a few minutes left, so I'm going to throw a few out at you really quickly. So if you can be brief, that'd be great. Sound like somebody else prime time now, but anyway. In terms of a question here as regards a 6-row winter barley, growth regulator was put on in terms of Menace Max and CCC previously. Does it need another growth regulator?
No, is the honest answer. I presume that crop is shooting out now at this stage. Rob Beattie did a good bit of work here a couple of years ago looking at inputs difference between 6 rows and 2 rows. And basically, long story short, Rob found there's little difference between the programs that you would have with a 6 row versus a 2 row, or a 6 row hybrid versus a 2 row. So that should be fine.
Okay, Ciaran, one for you. In terms of beans, a bit of bean weevil activity out there. How much notching is acceptable, and when should guys, I suppose, stop to a degree?
Yeah, I suppose the critical thing really is the notching. Obviously doesn't visually, it looks bad, but it doesn't actually make a whole lot of difference unless the numbers are that high that they completely defoliate the crop really. It's the larvae, obviously the feed and the nodules that stop the plant from fixing atmospheric nitrogen is the key issue there. Once the crop generally gets to 6 to 8 pairs of leaves, it can generally withstand that level of damage that would be done. So I'd imagine a lot of crops are thereabouts at this stage. Prior to that, it certainly could warrant an insecticide. And I suppose the way you kind of look at it is they'll always be somewhere on the headlands where they'll come out from the ditch. But if you're finding that notching out in the field and the crop is quite small, maybe 2-4 pairs of leaves, that way you certainly may warrant an insecticide at that stage.
Okay. Stephen, one for you. A quick one on winter oilseed rape. Weather's been dry. Sclerotinia, is it worthwhile going after it now?
I suppose if it was this day last week, I would have said get out. We had the rain. Over the next, I suppose the forecast for the next 10 days is looking pretty dry. So it wouldn't be anticipating a huge amount of Sclerotinia. But again, it's going to get back to understanding where you are in the country and what is the risk, because I say no rain here in Oak Park, no risk here in Oak Park, but in Cork over the last few days there was quite a bit of risk. So if there's rain forecast, you'd be out before it. If not, it's not a huge risk at the moment. And I think a lot of the flowers are actually gone now in some of these crops, so the risk is over.
Okay. Quick one, a couple of questions in here about nitrogen. Shay, I'm going to ask you this one. In terms of a lot of nitrogen's going out in really dry weather, is any of that going to be lost?
I presume it's all gone out in the form of CAN. So CAN is probably the most stable form of nitrogen that we have. It's the safest form that we have, so I'd say most of it is probably going to be available. There will be some losses, but there certainly will be slight. If you're using urea in dry weather, obviously you expect a lot more losses. So I presume it's CAN that they're talking about, and this should be safe enough. Even good dews in the morning should be enough to try and get it into the soil.
Okay. Ciaran, I'm going to ask you one about ryegrass control in winter wheat. Can it be done at this stage?
It depends on the timing, and I'm just thinking here in around flagleaf. Yes, there are options to do it up to flagleaf. Yeah, there would be. Yeah.
Sounds possible out there as well. Okay, the other question, another one's coming in here, which is about, and there's lots of fungicides, lots of chemistry, I suppose, going off the market at the end of this year. Shay, I might throw this one at you. How should guys kind of deal with that? There's the likes of the Corabels and there's Gentons and there's various different elements, different products going. What should guys do?
Yeah, again, it comes down to managing your spray store. So you need to look at what crops you have. Are there opportunities out there, or is there a need? I suppose is probably the proper way to put it in terms of using those products up now. Because obviously we probably have about 3 weeks to a month to use a lot of these fungicides that are going to go to, as you said, the likes of Corbel, the likes of Genton and these products. So we have to look first to see, can you justify using them? Is there a need for using them? And use them up then as best you possibly can, rotate around your chemical store and try and get them used up. If it's a case that they're not used, obviously then you can't use them next year, so you have to dispose of them in a proper manner after that.
Okay, kind of a follow-on one for you, Stephen. It's from Martin. Martin asked the question, it's about chlorothalonil and the use update. He asked the question on spring barley, should it be kind of a T1.5 to try and get the best out of that Bravo at growth stage 30-31?
What I would say is between now and the 20th of May, it's probably only going to get enough time to get one application, and the difference in a couple of days in terms of that, its benefit is not going to be massive. As Ciaran sort of mentioned, it's really huge level of control comes from that final spray. There'll be some level comes early. I think I'm planning at that early sort of mid-day tillering would be enough. Being honest, I don't think you'll get any benefit from waiting a few more days to go.
Okay. Look, guys, I really want to thank all of you very much. We've kind of pretty much come to the end of the time. We said we do this in the hour. So, Ciaran, Steven, and Shay, I really want to thank you for your contribution. Obviously, thanks to Johnny Hogan as well for his bit out in the field. It was really useful to kind of set it up, if you like. So, I also want to thank everybody who dialed in, either on Zoom or on the phone. The questions were flying in. There's been a lot of people answering, and we'll try and get back to a couple of questions that we didn't answer at the time. Again, just to say, this hour, if you like, will go up on YouTube. It'll go up on the Teagasc Crops YouTube channel. So when you go in there, don't forget to subscribe to that as well. It's a huge amount of information there. And you'll see lots of other bits that Shay and some of the lads have done over the time. There's lots of other information that you can get over the time. We're trying very hard here in Teagasc to push out stuff in a digital format. We have the Tillage Edge, which is a podcast that goes out every week where I discuss various different topics with researchers and other people around the industry. So log on to that. It's something you can listen to in the tractor. So look, after that, there's lots of other information, I suppose, on teagasc.ie. You can log in there. There's lots of crops pages, and there's obviously the tillage or the Teagasc Daily. You get lots of information there as well. So after that, just want to thank again you very much for tuning in this evening. Hope you have a really good evening after this, and obviously stay safe in these current times. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.